Howdy guys, Jimmy Song here. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Tech Talk. This is a show every Monday where I review all of the different things that happened throughout this week in Bitcoin. There's a lot of things that we got to talk about. So without further ado, let's go to my screen. First thing I want to do is to show a couple of my things. We have the Little Bitcoin book, which is available on paperback, Kindle, audiobook, Spanish, and Portuguese. Some other languages coming soon. But yeah, you can order this from Amazon. It's $11.99 for the paperback. The other book I have is Programming Bitcoin, which is published by O'Reilly. You can buy this book on Amazon as well, $42.58. It is also a good book to get if you want to learn programming Bitcoin and you know some Python and some programming. So that's a good way to get started. All right, so let's get into the issue. Bitcoin Tech Talk is a newsletter I write every Monday, and it comes out at 9 a.m. Central Time. And essentially, it covers all of the news, and this is a show where I more or less go through that and some of my tweets and other stuff. All right, let's take a look. All right, so this week's newsletter focuses on money, meaning, and Bitcoin, and we are indeed in an extraordinary time. Not only do we have a global emergency in the form of coronavirus, but we also have trillions and trillions of dollars of money printing. It's just kind of gone absolutely insane. And a lot of people are asking questions like, what's going on? And how can they print this much money? And how does money work? And why are governments just doing so much or printing so much, and how is that all at all fair, and why am I paying taxes at all? These are questions, very good questions, and these are the questions that a lot of us in Bitcoin have thought quite a lot about. But the thing is, like, for the mainstream, there's a lot of people that haven't gone through this yet, and they are just starting to ask these questions. And that's where I wanted to go through this article from Jared Dillon, who says money is losing its meaning. And this will be our long read later. But basically, it's a really good article on just asking basic questions about money. What the heck's going on? And yeah, we'll go through exactly what that says. And basically, all that's to say that these are the questions that lead people to Bitcoin, and it's not a coincidence that a lot of these exchanges have had an amazing march, and it's only a matter of time before more people adopt it. And with the halvening about 3 weeks away from today, it's setting up pretty well for a bull run. All right, so let's take a look at some of this stuff. Brian Bishop has created a Bitcoin vault on GitHub. So it's a little bit easier to talk about it, but basically it's kind of like a time vault. So if you take money out of it, it's sort of in the clear, and you have the ability to rescue it from theft for a period of a week. So presumably you'd be alerted to the fact that it's moved, and using that information, you can take steps to recover the money before it can get moved again. So it's a form of a covenant, but it's a really cool idea, and he's basically implemented it, and he has a bunch of details and the actual installation and everything else. It's not quite ready for prime time, but the idea of a covenant that is sort of like restricting the way that the coins can be spent beforehand is kind of a cool way to do it. This is what object template verify is all about, and I've covered that on this show. But it's sort of like a limited form of that, and that's what Brian is doing here. All right. Blockstream has announced pay to endpoint. This is another privacy upgrade, essentially, and essentially they put it into they collaborated with BTC Pay to implement pay to endpoint into the BTC Pay software. So I think this diagram does a pretty good job of showing what's going on. Essentially, a normal Bitcoin transaction, if you have some amount of Bitcoins or some sats or something, and you spend some, whoever receives the payment, you can kind of see, okay, well, especially if it's a large amount on the input and it's a large amount on the output, it's fairly clear who's spending what. And chain analysis is very easy to do on transactions like this because you're usually going backwards trying to find out, okay, well, where did this money come from? And if it only has one node, then it's very easy to trace back. What pay to endpoint does is it makes it so that the merchant also puts in an input. So it looks like a normal sort of like coin join, a 2 of 2 coin join. So you have an anonymity set, and as you keep multiplying this, your anonymity set gets bigger and bigger, assuming that more people do it. The only thing is that you need the merchant to sign, so you need some way to do that. But this is an excellent way to get this done, and I hope more people adopt it. And it's another step in privacy, and it's not going to solve everything, but it does sort of add privacy to your stuff and sort of breaks chain analysis a little bit. Ministry of Nodes has an excellent article on why Bitcoin donation addresses are terrible, and this is Ministry of Nodes, I think, is run by Stefan Livera, and basically he talks about why it's just so terrible for privacy, and how you're not just harming your own privacy, but the privacy of anyone that's paid you. And he puts out the alternatives, Paynims from Samurai and BTC Pay as an example, and just goes over how you can actually configure your stuff so you don't have a donation address. So that's another very good article for those of you that are interested in that. Economics, engineering, etc. Jameson Lopp has this really interesting anecdote, how the SEC nearly destroyed my retirement account. So essentially what happened was that he transferred his money. He had a bunch of GBTC in his 401k, but they take a 2% management fee literally every year. So you're not getting as high a return as you should because of the management fee. And there was something else, CXBTF, which was out of Sweden, that was supposed to take lower fees. So he's converted in 2018, except the SEC put a trading halt on it on September, shortly after he transitioned it. So he essentially tried to sell it, but it wasn't very easy. And in the end, he ended up having to use like their international trading desk and have to actually call in, and they almost screwed up and put in too low of a sell order, which would have been like a really terrible fat finger. And yeah, his point is that if you don't own the asset, you don't own the asset. It's it's a third party, and you have a claim to it from a legal standpoint, but you don't actually possess it. It's not a bearer instrument, and for that reason, you should be very careful. All right. Financial Stability Board issued a statement about stable coins. I covered this on Tone's show a little bit, but basically this is regulatory, supervisory, and oversight challenges about global stable coins. And they go on and come up with a bunch of like different recommendations. These are the actual recommendations that they're making. Essentially, what they're saying is that they have the same market, it's the same risks, and they should have the same rules. And like there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is gonna kill the Bitcoin market." I don't think it kills the Bitcoin market. It kills a lot of the exchanges, which rely deeply on stable coins as a fast way to liquidity. And if they had a fiat on ramp, it would be much more costly. I mean, Binance is a very obvious example of that. But if you don't have the license in that place, then why should you get? I mean, the point of the FSP is that why should these crypto funds have an advantage over the others by not being regulated the same way? The hilarious thing is the guys like this who's like final boss emerged. It's like we're going to roll digital. They can control, and basically he was saying something like. Yeah, we want to, we're all united in this, and Bitcoiners, we're going to all cooperate. I'm like, no, we're not. Basically, this is the fate of anything that's centralized, and we'll see later in my tweet. Basically, it's what altcoiners have been dreading for a long time. But if you're a Bitcoin, you don't really care. Speaking of stable coins, Libra is heading into, like, they look like they're going to become more of a stable coin. Essentially, what David Marcus and the folks at Facebook are doing is they're going to peg it to the underlying currency, like a dollar or something like that. In a way that's basically they want to be the WeChat for the dollar. And they might succeed, they might not. I think regulators are not that happy about it, but we'll see where that goes. But that's the play I think that they're trying to do. All right, another DeFi smart contract failure. I talked about this on Tone Show as well. But basically, this is DeForce. It's China's DeFi instrument. But basically, $25 million was drained just like 5 days after Multicoin Capital announced that they invested a 1.5 million seed round. It's so crazy that they literally had the same exploit as Uniswap. Most likely they just copied and pasted the code. So Uniswap lost like $300,000. DeForce lost $25 million. How many times do these things have to happen before people just quit DeFi entirely? It just seems so stupid to put your money in something that insecure. So Purse is shutting down, and they made the decision to essentially abandon or like shut down the business. They had a lot of investors. The big thing about them was that they started going towards altcoins not too long back. I'm told that the Amazon affiliate commission was reduced from like 8% to 1%, and that might just have killed them off. Also, I think they used a lot of unused Amazon gift cards and things like that. But it's who knows? They're shutting down. It's a little bit sad, but in a sense, like they kind of asked for it because they abandoned the Bitcoin stuff. All right, after the $0 liquidations, MakerDAO is getting sued. So this is it looks like a class action lawsuit against the Maker Foundation, and yeah, it's your stuff got liquidated for $0. That's the sort of thing that's going to happen, and it's going. If you're a single point of failure, you're going to get sued, and there's a lot of single points of failure in the crypto space. In the altcoin space anyway. It looks like the famed XRP army is much smaller, according to Aztec BTC. Something like 65% of the Ripple interest has gone away, and Litecoin is another one. I guess Whale Club lost a lot, but that's more a trading forum. Decred's not lost quite as much. Monero lost about half. But yeah, just these are people that are no longer interested. It's kind of crazy. Also, Tiffany Hayden, who's been a long time XRP supporter, just kind of quit. It seems like these people just stop getting paid, so they stop sort of supporting it. That seems to be the case here. All right, I did the Bitcoin and cypherpunks history and shelling out, and you can take a look at both of those if you missed it this past week. Let's return to let's talk about the tweets that I had this week, and then we will do our long read. All right, so you know how the Fed is printing trillions right now? Did you vote to have them do it? Did you consent in any way? Our money system is not democratic. It's authoritarian. Bitcoin is the monetary red pill. And I think this was either the most popular tweet this week or the second most favorite. But yeah, essentially, like we don't get any say in the money printing. The Fed is supposed to be completely independent of government. So, like whoever you vote into office, the Fed could do whatever the heck they want. And that's the reality, is that we have zero sovereignty over our money. Not even indirect representative democracy. It's the Fed policy just happens on its own. I think the president gets to appoint the Fed Reserve chairman, but that's about it. It's completely an oligarchy, a plutocracy, not a democracy when it comes to the U.S. dollar, and that's a real infringement on our freedom. Legal tender laws are what enforce monetary authoritarianism. Internationally, global settlements of the dollar is enforced by the U.S. military via the petrodollar. This is why the Fed can get away with money printing. Bitcoin is the monetary red pill. I'm pointing out here that essentially we're exporting inflation, and the U.S. military basically makes it so that if you try to sell oil for something other than the dollar, there's a war coming, right? Like this happened to Libya and Iraq, for example. So just something to think about. Legal tender laws domestically and internationally, it's a U.S. military. Solipsism is the enemy of successful entrepreneurship. It's not about you, it's about the customer. I've just noticed that a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking about only themselves, or thinking that they're the only ones affected. That's just not true. All right, every government is carefully measuring how much they can get away with during the crisis. No one can effectively protest because that requires a gathering. I guarantee some government in the next 10 years will use the there's a pandemic excuse to prevent revolt. Or even worse, they'll create a bioweapon to release to their own people when they think they're about to lose hold of power. Bunch of people mentioned that might already be the case, that this global collapse needed to be blamed on something, and that they released this as a bioweapon to sort of buy them more time. I don't know, that's a little bit out there for me from a conspiracy theory perspective, but I mean, it's true. Every government is looking at it and saying, we could completely shut down protests by saying there's a pandemic. So, I mean, just think about it. And this is the Ryan S. Adams, tweet. Bitcoiners and Ethereans need to remain united against the coming assault on our monetary freedom. Stop the bickering, quit the tribalism. We're united on this, preserving our sovereignty against those who would take it. It's Team Crypto now. Never mind that this guy shits on Bitcoin every single tweet. Now he wants to stop the bickering and quit the tribalism. No, thank you. I commented, this reads like a list of things this guy wishes were true, buddy. These are the risks of centralization. You made your bed. Go lie in it with all the other centralized crap. I did a show with Tone. Bitcoin is peaceful protest. This was in response to the rally police saying protesting is a non-essential activity. This is very Orwellian, honestly. It's like, you don't need to protest because we got your best interests in mind. All right, story of misaligned incentives. They get paid 15% more if the death is from the buyer, so they're inflating the numbers. This is from the recent bill, stimulus bill, and New York City basically reassigned 3,700 people that they couldn't confirm died of coronavirus and just said, yeah, they died of coronavirus. Why? Because they're getting paid 15% more. FSB stablecoin memo. Stablecoin should be regulated as similar industries. If they don't meet the regulatory requirements of a particular jurisdiction, they should be banned there. That's it. It's really all it is. And coins with a single point of failure, that's every other coin than Bitcoin. That's why they're eventually doomed. They'll get regulated away. All right. I did Swan also, and next Sabo shelling out. This was a fairly popular tweet. You are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch, a prison for your mind. The free money you receive are the shackles of your monetary imprisonment. Bitcoin is the monetary red pill. We've all been born into a monetary system that we cannot see or hear or touch. And that's kind of the reality, and it's hard to sort of break out of that and know what else is out there, what the real world is like, and that's what Bitcoin breaks us out of. And it is a Matrix quote. If you haven't watched that movie, it's a really good movie. Blockdown conference is where I spoke as well. That video hasn't appeared yet. That's why it isn't in the newsletter. If this crisis hasn't taught you to not trust government authorities, the next one will. These things come up every 10 years or so and wake a new generation up to the reality of government evil and incompetence. Not only is there a lot of government evil, there's a lot of government incompetence that's being shown during this crisis. They're not letting the crisis go to waste, that's for certain. They're taking the time to print trillions of dollars for their friends. But they're also showing all sorts of administrative incompetencies all over the place. Hospitals that don't let their doctors wear masks. I mean, I can't imagine what could be more cruel to frontline workers than to deny them masks. Customs agents that won't let N95 masks into the United States. All sorts of like people asking to, or governments asking for to snitch on people, things like that. It's just absolute insanity. What good or service are you going to consume first when the quarantine in your jurisdiction is over? Turns out a lot of people like to climb. They need haircuts. They want to eat out. Some are prepping for the next one. It's kind of interesting. Voting is a poor consent system. It's essentially putting trust in a group of self-promoting individuals. Markets are a much better way to gauge where people are at. Money being spent is a lot more honest. Bitcoin adoption is an indicator of the fiat system's brokenness. Essentially, like you're voting with your wallet every time you're spending money, and that's a lot more honest a vote than one from the voting booth. So. People spending money on Bitcoin tells you that less people are believing in the fiat system. Stocks have gone up because they have a store value premium, not because of the underlying company's fundamentals. Small businesses that have been forced to close for the last 6 weeks pay the price just like every crisis. Big companies win. Reset the system with Bitcoin. Essentially, what I'm saying here is that there's a lot of small businesses that close every time there's a recession because they don't have access to the cheap loans. They're not too big to fail, so they fail. A lot of these big companies, on the other hand, they get to be zombie companies, essentially. All right, this was the Crush the Street one. All right, all those small businesses going bankrupt? Guess who'll be buying up the equipment and resources on the cheap? Those with access to cheap loans from the government. Banks and big corporations. This is how people get screwed out of their blood, sweat, and tears. This was my most popular tweet this week, and it's true. Basically, if you're a small business that's going bankrupt, you have to sort of fire sale, or the bank takes possession of your stuff. Everyone's getting a discount, and they're going to get even bigger. The big companies get even bigger because they can survive. The small companies go away, and the big companies get more of a monopoly every time. The stock market is not a reflection of the economy. Most of the money is there due to a lack of better options. Lots of real people are suffering, and the devastation is just getting started. Bitcoin is a better place to store value. Again, there's a store value premium in the stock market. Everyone that needs a place to park their money, especially when there's a lot of it, that's where it tends to go, stocks and real estate. Remember 3 weeks ago when you couldn't get any toilet paper? Just returned from the grocery store. There's a glut of toilet paper. Situations change often very quickly and rapidly. There's at least a few twists and turns to go. In other words, don't despair, guys. It's going to be, we're not going to be in lockdown forever. And, the things that you think are going to stay the same won't necessarily be. Money is the base layer of civilization. We need to change out the base layer. Our current base layer is a terrible platform on which to build. If I'm making an analogy to sort of like software architecture or something, we're building on a terrible OS, and that's essentially the sad reality. Turns out most people think that it's going to be above 8,000 in 3 weeks. I certainly hope that's true, but I guess. We got about 42% bears, I guess, and 58%, bulls. Fiat, where everything is made up and the prices don't matter for governments. That's a line from Whose Line Is It Anyway? Every dollar the Fed prints is picking winners and losers. Winners, government employees, banks, big companies, already rich people. Losers, private sector employees, small businesses, middle class paycheck workers. Reset the system with Bitcoin. So, and essentially the Fed prints money. Certain people win, certain people lose, and it's the same people that win every time. And ripping people off, they're getting lots of new money. Examples: universities, banks, large corporations, airlines. This is crony capitalism at work. It's insane that Harvard is getting money. They have billions of dollars, and they're ripping off their students because they're forcing them all to do courses online instead of having campus life. And especially if you're going to something like business school, where most of the value is in meeting other people that are that have the same interests that you can use as contacts for the rest of your life. It's a complete and utter ripoff. So the fact that these are places that are getting bailout money is just absolutely crazy. And finally, just wanted to remind everyone that Ethereum was dubbed oil to Bitcoin's gold from its inception. And this is from Quora. Joel Dietz is sort of an Ethereum evangelist. And you can see that this was January 31st, 2014. A little bit before their token sale. Ethereum has been described by core developers as oil to Bitcoin's gold. Just given how oil crashed like crazy, that is, hopefully the fate of Ethereum. I really wish that thing would die. All right, let's take a look at the long read from today. This is Bloomberg opinion from Jared Dillon. Doing whatever it takes to save the global economy from coronavirus pandemic is going to cost a lot of money. The U.S. government alone is spending a few $1 trillion, and the Federal Reserve is creating another few $1 trillion to keep the financial system from collapsing. A custom Bloomberg index measuring M2 figures for 12 major economies, including the US, China, Eurozone, and Japan, shows that their aggregate money supply had already more than doubled to 80 trillion from before the 2008-2009 financial crisis. These numbers are so large that they no longer have any meaning. They are simply abstractions. It's been some time since people thought about the concept of money and its purpose. The broad idea is that money has value, but that value is not arbitrary. Former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker once said in an interview that it is a governmental responsibility to maintain the value of the currency they issue. And when they fail to do that, it is something that undermines an essential trust in government. Well, in that case, we've all lost it. The dollar has no real intrinsic value, backed only by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Under a fiat currency system, the government says that a dollar is a dollar. Its value relative to things such as other currencies and gold is determined on global markets. Gold is considered to be an objective store of value, and the metal's rise in dollar terms can be expressed another way, which is that the dollar fell in gold terms. That implies the market has rendered a decision decision on the value or the purchasing power of the dollar. Since 1971, gold has gone from $32 to what is it right now, like $1,900. So, that's the depreciating value of the U.S. dollar, essentially. The three main functions of currency are as a unit of account, medium of exchange, and a store of value. It is that last function that is the most important. Ideally, a central bank would want its currency to retain its value over time. The era of flexible monetary standards, however, allows central banks to manipulate a currency's value to help fight recessions, as well as smooth out and lengthen business cycles at the expense of inflation. But even low inflation, say on the order of 2%, will greatly erode the purchasing power of a currency over time. And now, this is basically a little bit of, modern economics fallacy that there is a purchasing power thing that can be measured. But it's what inflation actually is classically is monetary expansion, and it's way greater than 2% on an annual basis. And if there are too many dollars in circulation, the monetarists would say that the value of those dollars has diminished, eventually leading to higher prices for things. That theory hasn't worked too well in the last decade because inflation has been low and stable, but it is too soon to declare it discredited. The transmission mechanism that results in inflation is not well understood even 45 years after the last great period of inflation. A lot of that money, that inflation actually goes to third world countries, as I've pointed out. The demand for dollars in third world countries is near infinite. So anytime that the U.S. prints too much money, there's a trade deficit, and all those countries get more of the dollars, and then their local currency becomes worth less and less, and that eventually leads to hyperinflation. So in a sense, we've exported the inflation and gained at the other countries' expense. It took a while, but it seems as though the U.S. government has decided that it has no constraints on its spending as long as the Fed continues to monetize government borrowing by purchasing the debt issued to finance expenditures. It's not crazy to think the government spending may reach 10 trillion just for just 1 year, and the numbers will go up from there. I've said that I think quadrillion is going to enter our lexicon pretty soon because that's 1,000 times a trillion. 10 trillion is going to look like cupcake pretty soon. Nobody really knows how this is going to turn out. In smaller economies, runaway government spending has resulted in hyperinflation and social unrest, such as well-documented cases in Venezuela and Zimbabwe. Many think that wouldn't be possible in the U.S. given the dollar's role in the world's as the world's primary reserve currency. Perhaps, but it's not one of those questions we really want to experiment with. Well, we're experimenting with it whether we know it or not. And we do have a dollar hegemony all over the world. So the dollar is probably going to be the last one to hyperinflate, but you can expect other currencies to hyperinflate. Just watch. If all this money that's being created does spark inflation, or at least boosts inflation expectations, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. Inflation rates soared in 1979, but that was during a time unlike now when government officials believed that the balanced budgets and careful spending were important. A blistering series of interest rate hikes pummeled inflation expectations, but the result was a hurricane-force recession. Argentina, which has more or less been practicing MMT for some time, proves that it's hard to put the inflation genie back in the bottle. Argentines have been hoarding dollars, the only practical store of value other than gold, for decades. They probably view recent events in the U.S. with some trepidation. That's more the dollar hegemony than anything else. The counterexample to all this is Japan, which historically has had the most debt relative to the size of its economy and the most radical monetary policy, and yet has a peaceful, productive society with scant inflation. Demographics explain a lot about inflation and inflation expectations, and Japan's steady declining and aging population has put downward pressure on prices for years in spite of all the printing. Economists and central banks generally fear deflation more than inflation because it can hinder investment. History has shown that and essentially the government is taking the money from the people and all the wealth of the people in order to fund their activities. And it's a form of a tax. The Japanese people, because they're getting older and it's an aging population, don't seem to mind quite as much or don't have the energy to protest. Anyway, that was the article from Jared Dillon. This I think this captures the mood of sort of what people are seeing out there today, and that's an important data point as more people adopt Bitcoin. It's available in English, Korean, and Polish. Japanese, Russian, and Chinese will be coming out soon as well. All right, it looks like that's about it. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't think there are. Anyway, it was it's a pleasure to be around and talking to you folks. Fiat delenda est. This song is done.